right, good evening, everybody. We're going to give a few moments for you guys to stream in. Apparently, I am streaming on Instagram tonight, but I don't know if it's working. It doesn't look like it is. But technically, tonight we are on the Ghostly Archives. We are streaming on X, Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, and apparently Instagram. This is my first time trying it, but it doesn't seem to be working. So remember, as usual, if you want to support the channel, please subscribe on all the platforms, share our content, like the content, rate 5 stars on the podcast audio platforms like iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you go. Helps us show up on it just helps us show up on their charts better if people are rating us, interacting, liking things, bookmarking things on X, slapping a heart, sticking a thumbs up. All of that stuff helps the show grow. And you don't have to spend any money at all, but I mean, if you do want to support it financially, of course, we are at buymeacoffee.com/GenXNews. That's buymeacoffee.com/GenXNews. Now, my guest today that I'm going to bring in a few moments is Rob Yox. He runs Full Spectrum Universe podcast, big YouTube channel. He's a podcaster, historian, researcher, international speaker. He does a lot of stuff on conspiracy, but also a lot of spirituality stuff. We're going to probably focus on the conspiratorial elements, and hopefully YouTube won't get all pissy and upset about it, but whatever. I mean, they demonetized me anyways. Guys, go over to Rumble. Go to Rumble, go to X and subscribe there. Don't bother with there's the Rumble. Don't bother with the YouTube. They're just terrible. You can't talk about anything. God forbid you should actually question their narratives, right? And we are definitely going to be questioning narratives, historical narratives, things like the Gregorian calendar, resets and how elites change things and change all of history and rewrite it, and different historical conspiracy theories, maybe even discuss the fact that there was conspiracy theories even in like Roman times. So I am not going to ramble on too much longer. I'm just going to bring Rob in. Welcome to the show.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. And do you know that you were actually my third guest ever? And we haven't been on a
Really?
show together since then. And that was about 3 years ago.
Was that 3 years ago?
Yeah.
That was probably pandemic time, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. It was right in the beginning, right when I had about 17 subscribers. And we laid it down. And that helped create the archetype for where I went with the show after that, too. So it's, much appreciated. And, it was awesome. It was awesome.
So, what we get into all this stuff, how did you get into conspiracy and why podcasts and like spirituality, conspiracy stuff? What made you want to focus on what the heck was going on with all these narratives and elites, and like where did that come from?
Well, I started with history, right? History led me to a bevel of different topics to talk about, but history itself, as you go through and trying to create like a timeline for yourself of what's happening, who's where, what's what, who's who, you see a lot of chunks of time either missing or incomplete in the records, right? And a lot of that ancient knowledge pointed me towards ufology too, because they all talk about extraterrestrial life as in gods and things like that. So a lot of that took me into an exploratory mode of all these different stories and archetypes that you see throughout mainstream history. And once we went through mainstream history, I was really looking for like subtext. Like, I want to hear about the things like they say that the history is written by the victors. I wanted to hear what the losers had to say too, because that's a better and more robust understanding of the actual situations because you get both sides of it. So we started to go into a lot of the underlaying stuff of what the mainstream was talking about. And we started to find different civilizations that were completely eliminated, and they were taken out. Their histories were taken out. Their concepts were taken out. And as we keep going, we venture into like we go from Europe and Asia to the North America. We get to the Native Americans and how they were actually attenuating themselves to be a part of the land as well as the animals, the trees. And so there's a lot of mythos that goes into that. But a lot of these ancient tribes and a lot of these ancient peoples all have a very similar story when we get into the mythos of their creation, and also the way that they revered their deities and things like that. So that kind of took me into ufology, and then from ufology, there's a component of it that's more spiritual, where you start to see
Mhm.
energy, and we talk about the different balance of energy between humanity, extraterrestrial, the planet, and we get into that mode, and that's kind of where it really started for me, where I started to really dive into the energetic aspect of who, what, and how we are, and how we interact with the environment around us, and it became just a real, like a lead weight into a deep pond, and I sank all the way to the bottom. I went down every rabbit hole you could possibly think of, and I've accumulated a lot of research, creating an
Mhm.
archive that's going to be open eventually to everybody. I haven't finished really, buttoning up everything yet, but we're going to open an archive
Mhm.
for people to essentially dive through and go about however they want to take this information to like the next level.
One of the I was looking at an article before we started the show, and it was basically criticizing conspiracy theories, like, and in a very dismissive, and basically they were basically saying the plandemic video, questions you should ask. Is the present, they say, we're one-sided. We have an independent pursuit of the truth, and they present it all in a negative tone. But don't you find it ironic that a lot of these things that they criticize us or anyone who has conspiracy theories of, usually it ends up unfolding, like, I don't know, now maybe within 6 months that a lot of conspiracy theorists were right, especially about pandemic.
You should definitely thank your local conspiracy theorists because, and I'm going to tell you why, we were like 100 in wins when it came, especially to the pandemic. But just throughout the excesses of power in the United States and Canada and North America, and the way that a lot of us put stuff together came out to be 100% accurate. Because even the ones that are so far fetched that maybe it didn't come out as like 100% true, there's still monikers of truth in a lot of it,
Mhm.
and how they're moving towards these systems that essentially are trying to make people capitulate to the powers that be, when, especially in America, it's supposed to be the other way around. The
Well,
power is to the people.
and you know what I find, the really crazy ones like Q, most of that stuff is probably started by the CIA.
I
Anyways,
would
it's
agree.
not real. It's not really conspiracy theories. It's just some kind of psyop, weird, strange stuff. And they are so lame. It's like you can almost tell them now whenever they show up. Or they're at, they're dressed up like white supremacists, and you just know it's an FBI.
Oh, absolutely. I think
They're
Q
so.
is something a little bit different. I know somebody
Mhm.
who worked for the Department of Defense, and they kind of led me into this supercomputer that they have. And this supercomputer strategizes in war games a lot, just about everything you can think of. But one thing they didn't realize was that when they hooked this thing up to the internet, it became a little bit more sentient in the sense like AI is becoming, but it was way ahead of its time, and essentially it gave a back door to their planning. Like the elites would use this as a planning mechanism to essentially war game everything in any particular situation that they could possibly think of. But this computer is so self-relevant that it essentially gave out information to other people in the form of drops. And
Oh,
this
so
this
people were getting information from some AI source.
Right. And my friend, who I will shall remain nameless, but he worked on these nodes, and these nodes had about eight, I think it was eight, either 800,000 or 8,000 terabyte um, processing power. And there was about a million of these nodes that were all hooked together to do this wargaming, and this wargaming became it's almost like Project Looking Glass, if you've ever heard of it, where they're able to look and see the future or different timelines. So this computer is actualizing these timelines, and when it does this, it
Mhm.
also has what the fallout might be or the potentiality of all the different situations that come from that particular event. But
Right.
what they didn't realize was that when they hooked it to the internet, it was also giving the opposition to what they were thinking information as well. And that's kind of why if we when we look at the Q drops, if we look at them backwards, they sometimes make sense, sometimes they don't. A lot of people will say, "Oh, they sure do." But I believe it's the AI reaching out to the opposition saying, "This is what we're planning," or "This
Okay.
is what they're planning," because it's a balance, right? Everything in the universe has balance. So
Right.
if we look at that, it's sort of the yin and the yang of AI or artificial intelligence.
Well, I would never have thought of AI and yin and yang. I would have never occurred those 2 words, would have never occurred to me, but I mean, do you think AI will become totally sentient and spiritual?
I hope not. I hope not.
Me
I
neither.
I hope not. I think that they're working towards that, though. If we look at what the people are planning with when we talk about transhumanism and things like that, they wanna have this body that lives forever, and they're using AI to essentially, basically create these bodies that they can eventually download their consciousness into. That's what the end game is, so that they could be immortal and live forever. And if they can be immortal and live forever, then they rule forever as well. And if they can't die, and if they have to keep transferring consciousness into a new body, that's the end game for them.
That sounds so gross.
It
It
does,
just
but
it sounds gross.
They've prophesized this. This is what, Noel Harari has talked about for the
Mm,
WEF, and some of the statements that
right?
he's made, he said that we can tailor make the human body, and we've become God now because we can literally take the genes and modify them however we see fit. And we saw a lot of that when we were looking at the pandemic too, and they were using things that were never used before to try and cure something that wasn't even so much of a threat now that we find out. But they were putting these
It
things into
was just a
people's
big
bodies.
experiment on us.
Yeah. Well, for multiple fronts, right? Just to see the reaction of humanity, but also to see how far they could push their agendas in the pharmaceutical industry. So it's wild.
This is an interesting comment. He said, "You can download a sterile copy of the consciousness, but without the soul."
Hmm.
Wow. Interesting. So, I want to. One of the things I want to get into. There's so much crap going on right now with all the wars that are starting, and people are supporting all. They either want Ukraine or Israel. I don't want to get into that, but I'm like, this is all just the same crap, guys. I'm not supporting any of it. I'm like they obviously have a reason for this. But let's go back in time and kind of look at. You were talking about the Gregorian calendar and the Vatican Council of Nicaea and how everything was shifted around for us. And that seems to be a really important moment in time because it seems to have switched. It seems to be similar to what we're going through now, where it's literally switched the way the world was run in a very dramatic and consequential, you know, way. I don't know a lot about it, so I can let you start off and talk about how our time was literally and our world was literally changed by the Vatican and the church.
Absolutely. So before we go into that portion of it, we have to know how the ancient peoples used to catalog time, right? And a lot
Mhm.
of it had to do with what they called yuga cycles. And yuga cycles were over, some say it's 27,000 years or 26,500 years. So what happens is humanity, and this is what the incarnations of humanity have been subjected to, but since the beginning of our known time, there has been a play for power. Power has come in many different forms, many different ways. When we get into the Council of Nicaea, it becomes a religious power move. But these yuga cycles are a way to map out actual universal time. And when we look at them, the ancient peoples knew that every 12,000 years, there would be either a catastrophic event, which was either, Mother Nature working its magic or man made. And that would either propel humanity into a advanced technological state or knock us back to the Stone Age. Now, there was a lot of people who have tried to basically incorporate this just half a yuga cycle to knock mankind back. And I think that has more to do with a little bit of the extraterrestrial aspect of it. But we can, jump a little bit forward. So these yuga cycles are still going on right now. We're actually at the very end of one right now. I
Mhm.
think we're about to go into the new one. But as mankind was coming out of the Dark Ages, the Roman Empire stood as the mightiest of the mighty. But they
Right.
were being invaded by all different types of barbaric tribes, some so much that they were even incorporating some of these barbaric tribes into their culture. And then they would turn on them. So, one of the things that they tried to do was because the emperors of the Roman Empire weren't holding as much power as they used to, they had to maneuver themselves to be in a place that made humanity sort of fear them in a way that was more so a threat after life as opposed to in life, right? If you did bad deeds now, you will spend eternity in hell, which is kind of how they saw that. So they used the fear tactic, like much like they do today, especially when you're talking about the wars and the death and the killings and all that kind of stuff. And they basically took the Council of Nicaea, they started to change the calendars and there used to be 3 extra months in there, which we don't talk about anymore, which would turn right now into like 2014 as opposed to 2024. So that throws us off the time cycle right off the bat, especially when it comes to solar eclipses, lunar eclipses. All that stuff is all thrown off from when it's supposed to be. But the Council of Nicaea took all of these tomes from all of these different tribes of Christianity and essentially grabbed them all and decided to take away 66 of those books became 33. So there's 33 extra books that were supposed to be in the Christian Bible from all of these different factions that saw it from different perspectives, and they buttoned it all up. They changed the calendar, and now they were the ruling force because of this. They controlled time, they controlled perception, and they controlled the afterlife. So medieval people essentially didn't have a chance to blossom in that way out of fear. And this is a tactic we see play right now, where everything around
Mhm.
every corner is out to get you. And they're going to tell you that. But if you understand the way that your soul or consciousness interacts with reality, that you're in the driver's seat. And they don't want you to know that. So a lot of those
They don't
tomes,
that's why they wanna make you afraid and control what you think and bombard you with their narratives
of course, and
repeatedly.
of course, another thing I tell people all the time is a man or a woman who doesn't know where they come from is a man or a woman lost. So a lot of these ancient societies that we talk about that were erased were integrated into other societies, which means that people don't may not know their true origin, which means you don't know your true heritage. They use
Yeah.
23andMe and they'll put you into like a continent, sub-Saharan Africa, whatever the case is, Europe,
Right.
Ireland, this and that, not realizing that all of these people, if we go further and further back than the 12,000 or 13,000 year written history that we supposedly have, you'll find ties to Atlantis. You'll find ties to Lemuria. You'll find ties to extraterrestrials. You'll find ties to the gods. There's a lot of different things they don't want people to know about because they want to keep you lost in time and lost in fear. And that's their tactic. And that's how they make you capitulate to the greater narratives that we see.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of, similarities to Rome apparently falling and what's happening now, like, with being invaded by different, well, they called them, like, I guess, like, Huns or, the German tribes, barbarians or whatever they said, but today they're like, "Oh, well, it's just migrants and illegal immigrants," but it kind of would appear to me that maybe something similar was happening, like, it's not by accident. These corrupt emperors or whatever's that are handling Rome are just, allowing them to come in because they're doing the same thing. They're using them for votes, they're using them for support, they're using them in the military, whatever it is. And they don't it seems like the elites don't care about heritage or people or their traditions or they're after something and where do they come from? Like, are they the same as us or there's something else or like these elite powers? Like, why are they so different and they're so psychopathic?
A lot of the industrial revolution gave them more of like an outreach to regular society. They used to be in the shadows a lot, but because of the banking systems and because of the power that was able to be maneuvered during the industrial revolution, they made themselves more known. But they've always been here, right?
Mhm.
These elite, while they can track their lineage probably to ancient Egypt, to ancient Sumer, maybe even, like I said before, Atlantis and some of the other things that we know about, some of the other civilizations, they've been here forever. They've only changed their name, right? They've changed in
Right.
name. They've changed in the ability to be secretive, and now they're more in the forefront because they feel that this is the time where they can jump forward and let people know. But if we look at, ancient Rome, ancient Greece, there were the aristocrats. The aristocrats did everything, the people that were at the top, even so much to destroy the Roman Empire, to transfer that power into the Vatican. Just like you were talking about, when
Mhm.
Rome was at its peak, its pivotal peak, they used something much like what's happening now at the border, as they introduced these barbaric tribes into the actual main street Rome. And what that did is it caused a revolt from the inside out, because any power Rome was so powerful back in the day that you couldn't just invade them. It was too big. It was too wealthy. There was too much going on. But the people in power knew that if they let these people in, eventually their ways of life would clash. And when their ways of life would clash, somebody's going to be the victor. And they can use their religion to essentially capitulate those, whoever the winner was, to be a part of that Vatican, which is another reason why the Vatican used to go around into France, into Germany, into England, into Ireland, to have the kings and the queens bend the knee to the
Mhm.
popes, because the popes were supposed to be the closest thing to God. And the instilling of that religion was the control mechanism by which they did it. Now, what's crazy about all this is, I'm telling you all this, but I am a Catholic and I was raised Catholic and I still
Right.
believe in the big bearded God out in the middle of omnipotent heaven. But at the same
Right.
time, there's a difference between faith and church. I see that
Yeah.
church is run by man, which means that it's corruptible, but my faith is not, because it's given to me by God and it's immutable, and God is immutable. So there's this corruption once man touches things, that tends to taint the experience for the ones who are of lesser stock or not as noble as the people who are at the top. Now, getting back to the Industrial Revolution, this is when they started to have really big runs on currencies, and currencies were given value by these big banking organizations. They needed a big something. We'll call it World War One and World War Two were the two big somethings that they were leading into.
I was talking about that the other day and how it was a false flag events there to get it going.
Well, if
It's
we look
cool.
at the Americans in World War Two, the Bush family funded Hitler with
Mhm.
gold, and eventually the grandson of that man would be the head of the CIA, which is no coincidence, right? And then eventually
Yeah.
president of the United States. So there's this
And
circle of power
mhm.
that once you start to take people and examine who they are, you'll see that they're all from the same bloodlines. They're all from the same stock of people, and they've been there since the beginning. Now, did we know them? No, because they were it was more of a shadow style, right? But now they're out in the open for everybody to see. I mean, why would if we take a look at American politics, look at Hillary Clinton, the Bushes, Obama, Biden, they're all running in the same circles. They're supposed to be polar opposites, right? That's the right and the left. But they all work in the same fields and funding the same causes and same foundations, and they all have the same archetype for laundering money through foreign conflict. And it becomes this
Yes.
power grab that they're going for. Look what happened in
Mhm.
Haiti and the Clintons, right? I don't want to
Yeah.
end up with a red scarf around my neck somewhere. So I'm not going to say too much about it, but because you know how the
Mhm.
Clintons' track record is crazy.
Mhm.
But
It is insane.
it's wild. If you go back and research the Clintons, you'll see that there is a blood trail that follows them. So they went to Haiti, asked for federal aid to help Haiti, and the Haitian people never saw a dime of it.
That's
And
right.
they also collected money from donors to help, and they repurposed that into the Clinton Foundation,
Exactly. Well,
just
and
like Bill and Melinda Gates too. They did the
we
same
have a
thing.
lot of we have a lot of people who will watch on X and they're, identify as Republican, maybe even pro-Trump. And I love them. I love the people I talk to on X. They're all great, but they seem to think there's a difference between the war in Ukraine and the war that's happening in the Middle East. I'll just leave it at that. They're for not for Ukraine, but they're for the other one. And I'm like, they're all doing the same shit. And both, if they're creating a war, they're getting money out of it, and they have an ulterior motive, and however whatever triggered the war they probably planned no matter what. I'm like, they're planning all of it, and you bet they're going to make a lot of money from it, and a lot of innocent people from all countries are going to die.
Well, that's what we don't like to see is death, and that
Yeah.
death is the fear, right?
Yeah.
When people die, people are afraid. Now, also, they're using these levers of narrative to separate the peoples in America. We see
Uh-huh.
the protests on the college campuses. We
Yeah.
see there are people calling other people names because of what their belief is. Now,
Mm-hmm.
again, a lot of the money that was given to Iran came from the unfreezing and basically the unfreeze. Joe Biden unfroze, I think it was like $3 trillion to or $3 billion to Iran.
Yep.
Now, Iran didn't get that money, but they
No.
could use that money to borrow from other places, saying this
Mhm.
money's coming. Like, it's pretty much like
Yeah,
that,
it's like
and
collateral.
sponsor a lot of these groups that are anti-Semitic and also anti-Western culture. So
Yeah.
this is how the network works, right? Iran is sort of the big dog, and they've got allies that are also the big dogs. So when those three big dogs start to do something that like is out of pocket, like what happened in Israel, the rest of the world should be standing up against it. But at the same time, I don't feel that decimation is just the answer, right? Like they just want to
I just
blow things up. But I
I just think
understand too that like a lot of hostages
skullduggery
too.
is going on both in Israel, in Iran, in America. I just think some sneaky stuff's going on in every single government. I just don't trust any of them
Oh,
anymore.
absolutely. Klaus Schwab said this. He says we've infiltrated the cabinets of every government on the
Yeah,
face of the planet, and
yeah,
this is what we mean by these ulterior motives. Right now, it's not just the peoples that are involved. They are just the pawns. Right, both
yeah,
sides. They're just the
exactly.
pawns. They're being put into action by the elite class to make money from the military industrial complex. One, two, to lessen the population because the dehumanization of anybody is a plus to them, and they take advantage of any situation that they possibly can. It's just like the Democratic, the DNC says, never let a bad situation go to waste, right? They want to
Mhm.
use it to politicize and to create a narrative, to funnel money, to garner power, and to
Yeah,
split hairs at home so that they can keep the people divided. Because one thing that all these elites fear is a united peoples.
yeah,
Because once the
and
people unite, it's over for them. They're being
I know.
exposed hand over fist right now as well, which is the truth of it. They're on their last leg, and this is their death throes on. They're really trying. But there's been people like us who have been screaming from the rooftops for the last 10 years, like, people need to wake up. And I think that the pandemic was a perfect moment, and not a perfect moment as in a good thing, but a perfect moment to show just how
Revelation.
right, how those conspiracy theorists who have been researching all this information for so many years. Look at, I mean, I don't want to say it, but look at Alex Jones. I mean, the man has been tamped right on so much of what he said. And everybody's like, oh, he's crazy. Blah, blah, blah. But like him or not, he's been right. And that's wild to think about because even as crazy as what he's saying, a lot of it's true.
Oh,
And
yeah.
people don't see it.
There's so many boomers today that not all of them, but a lot of them, if you talk to them, they'll be like, "The news said something else." Like, like, "You're crazy, the news said that." They think that's the truth, and they're so captivated and mesmerized by the screen. They don't realize that it's propaganda and hypnotizing. They think this is, an honest platform that is cares about them and is giving them factual information. I find that really humorous because I'm like, can't you feel it? Don't you have instincts? Can't you feel 9/11 felt wrong? Can't you feel that this pandemic's not right? There's something, just none of the information makes sense. It's nope. They're hit like I'm like, this is how propaganda really works.
Well,
And
I'll tell you the
go ahead.
project that they I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'll tell you the
No, no.
project that they've been using is called Project Mockingbird. If you
Yeah.
look up Project Mockingbird, it's where the CIA goes into in the 1940s, the CIA uses the news media as an arm of their narrative building, right? There's also something called a color revolution, which we've used to topple governments. So put those hand in hand. One of the first things that they do when they try to topple a government is they turn the people against the government. One, they use the means by which those narratives are created, which is the news, to create those narratives and unrest. But in the 1940s, Project Mockingbird, they were essentially using that during wartime to show people to activate the bases to support World War II. And what happens is people don't believe that this is still going on. But if we look at Obama's administration, he enacted a presidential executive order which allowed the government to propagandize to the people again when it had been outlawed for quite a while. And
Mhm.
this is just another lever that they're pulling to create these divides. And if Project Mockingbird wasn't enough, this new policy that they just put on the books not even 20 years ago, that they can openly lie to the people, right? And if that's not a red flag to somebody, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. And they also have controlled opposition. Controlled opposition is just whether it's right or left, they're telling you things to essentially get you ginned up, right? Like to get you really motivated to hate the other side. And that's what it comes
Yeah.
down to.
There's a lot, there's a lot of what we thought, like, even they're saying the Daily Wire might be controlled opposition, and I'm like, I stopped yeah, I stopped watching them once they fired Candace.
Well, they all have
I only went
narratives.
there for Candace, and they were like, fired her. I'm like, I have a feeling something weird's going on.
Well, of course, because she was the one standing up to their hypocrisy.
Yeah,
And it's wild how people play a persona on camera, and then you get them behind the scenes when they don't think they're being recorded and something else comes out. That's one of the reasons why when I do shows or podcasts or interviews, this is me. Well, like, take it
yeah,
or leave it. I'm not sugarcoating anything. I'm not telling you something that I don't believe, or if I think it's conjecture, I'll tell you that. Like, I got nothing to hide here. And this is really like this is part of the facade that journalism has become more of hit pieces and gotcha moments than actual stories and actual
yeah,
investigation, which is what the media is supposed to be here to keep people honest. And we've
yeah.
lost that.
It's done. We can thank Obama for that in part because he changed some laws during his time in which you basically said you didn't really even have to be honest as a journalist or in media. You could just, and you didn't have to. It took away integrity of journalism for sure. 100. Not that they weren't doing sneaky things anyways, but he certainly, skewered it dead. Um, Now we were talking about the Vatican and how they changed the calendars and stuff. I'm not sure how we can kind of express how that changed humans, like how what effect that would have had on us changing time. Like, do you have any concept of kind of before and after that point and how it sort of changed who we are?
Well, sure. I mean, first there's the seasons and cycles, right? The Earth is set on a particular axis to the sun, and the way that it rotates, and the first there was a lot more in the old world. There was a lot more days of rest because of that time. So people weren't always 9 to 5 routine. It felt like a cog in a machine, which is one part of it. But the other part of it is, like I said before, with the solar eclipses, the equinoxes, things like that. These are moments where the universe generates power, right? There is energies in these things. So when we start to lose time, we become almost like a float in a great sea, right? Without a direction. And humanity, while they added things and took things away, while it doesn't may not feel that it's like super relative or super important, if you came into some sort of like, let's say, a grand ballroom, and somebody said it was one time and somebody said it was another time, you would feel confused at first. And I think that they perpetuated this confusion because of that
Mhm.
change. And that confusion makes us feel awash in that great sea. And we're not really, all the prophecies that anybody ever talked about were set on different timelines, right? And we could talk about the Hopi prophecy where there's the great split, which people thought was 2 years ago, but really it's supposed to be the end of this year. I mean, really what it does is it just creates that confusion, and that's a displacing moment in time as right then and there if we don't understand the concepts of the full totality of the rotation of Earth around the sun and things like that. So there's a lot that goes with that, but I think it was more to just garner the control, right? To
Right.
say, "Okay, well, now we're in charge, and if we tell you that there's 2 less months, you're gonna go with it." And it was like a way to see if the humanity would capitulate to that order, and they did.
Right, and it also, enslaves us to their schedule, and I think it might make us less in touch with the natural organic cycles of the planet. We're not running out going, "Okay, this season we've gotta get all this stuff done. We've gotta do this and we've gotta do this." We're literally like, "Oh, what time does the clock say?" "What
Oh,
time
yeah.
is this? Oh, the train's coming at this time," which I'm not saying is wrong or you should feel bad about it, but I can see how that would totally disconnect our minds from a natural instinct or psychic process.
I totally agree with that, and I think that that was part of it too. That's just like what I was saying where a man or a woman who doesn't know where they come from is a man or a woman lost, right? If we don't know our heritage via genetically, where, your genes are people say that our genes are not so important, but they truly are because that's what gives way to hereditary types of diseases, hereditary things that like bad memory, and it's basically where we come from. It's our genetics. Now, if we go to a geneticist, he's going to tell you that 90% of your DNA is junk, which isn't true. It's just they don't know how to map it out. And a lot of that
Right.
junk is the intermingling of extraterrestrials that are essentially injecting their DNA onto this planet and tinkering with mankind to make us who we are today. And it stops us from seeing where we came from and if our origins are from before we were even on this planet as a species. That's where I
So
think that they wanna disconnect you from that too, because if
mhm.
you see that you're a part of something greater in the galactic conversation, then then you'll understand the true totality of your potential, and that
Yeah.
also they don't want.
And there's also a lot like we're not as into astrology, astronomy. We Nobody really understands the skies anymore or the constellation. Also, I find it interesting you were talking about like yugas and it's changing now. It's also we're heading from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius in another belief system. At
Yeah.
like these things are real.
I
These
I think it
shifts.
has yeah, I think it has a very big effect on the soul and the consciousness, and I think that it has a lot to do with. And we could talk about different aspects of this great awakening. I think it has a lot to do with the information, but also the great awakening of your potential and what you could potentially do. And if you understood how your thoughts interact with reality. And that's kind of where we get into the spiritual aspect of things because we can set intentions. And if we set intentions, the universe works with us and not against us. If we're always thinking negative thoughts, everything seems to be a chore. Our lives become more of a grind. We're less artistic, we're less expressive, and we also become a lot really mucked down in that 9 to 5 routine. We don't explore the parts of ourselves that bring us that joy, which is why mental health has been such an issue with today's society because of all those things that we just talked about and the fact that we don't understand how our body is working with the universe around us.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. One of the people in our audience, Jerry, said Fomenko discovered the missing time by way of eclipse records. That's interesting that you can kind of map it out if you're really intense. I don't know if I've never heard of it that before.
I've never mapped it out, but I know that during the beginnings of the Roman Empire, there were 3 extra months, and those 3 extra months make each decade a little bit, a little bit further off. We start to see time really start to capitulate to these elites, and they do. This is also when we started to get back into, like I said, the Industrial Revolution. People were factory workers, so these factory workers would go into a place that was dangerous, but also super detrimental to their health. That's like essentially the construct of how they want you to live today, right? Processed foods, always on the go. You go until the clock says certain time, and this is where they start to lower your vibrational frequency, and get stuck in this 2D primal or 3D dimensional reality where you're cognizant, but you're just again a cog in a machine, and you don't see your fullest potential, which is to be free at all aspects of it. Your will is no longer free. You're fomented to this system, and that system,
Right.
you're basically you're giving you're giving them the authority over you in that aspect, which is the worst part. Because people, if you don't feel like you're in the system or you're a part of that machine, then you don't know any better. And that's also what the Great Awakening is too, is waking up to these systems that they've put in place for the last 3,000 years that keep you in this
Mhm.
box. And if you escape that box, then now you're a problem. Now you're a pariah. Now you're ostracized in that way, which is another really wild thing to think about, you know?
Yeah, I know that clocks and time started off like one of the earliest recorded clocks I have here is like 1336, but you wouldn't have had it in your house. It would have been on a clock tower. So you just would have been paying attention to when it, like, rang on the hour probably mostly. So it just seems like slowly over time, they are I mean, before you would have just been, "Oh, the sun's coming up, I get up, I do all my stuff," and you would still have a work. I mean, you'd have to work. You'd have to till your fields or wash this. I mean, it's not like you wouldn't have things to do, but it's just interesting how it just it's like precision right down to the millisecond now. Like it's precise control rather than just, oh, I can hear the bell ringing every hour.
I agree. And that's
Mhm.
part of their system. Their system is to make sure that they are in control of your thoughts. They're in control of your anxieties. They're in control of all the fear that they could pump into you because that fear is going to keep you stuck in that place and not reach out and say, okay, now we got to do something. But they've also used big pharma to do that too, to pump you so full of things that your body no longer notices which way is up anymore, which is really part of the problem too. And there's a lot of different ways we could talk about how ancient peoples used to use certain things to affect their health, not what they're doing today, which is also another way that you're connecting with the planet. And that's the greatest conspiracy of all is that people used to be so connected to the planet that they would live off of where they were, wherever they were from, whether it was the desert or the Arctic Circle, they lived there and they flourished in those places. Now, if
Mhm.
you stick somebody out there, they'll probably die because they don't have that ability anymore. How many men know how to start fires, right? So let's say
Right.
they do something in along the lines of total catastrophe, and there's a handful of us left. How many are gonna die after that fact because they don't have the
Well,
skills that we used to have back then that that connected us to the planet in that way, and they
that's
want that
right.
too.
That's right. Well, and that's the whole like as we go on, it's I mean, it's kind of this interesting thing of invention of technology that makes us less organic and makes us more mechanical, like, because we have to operate in this system. I mean, you can't even get a job, like, you can't even get a job without, like, going through hell and hoops just for a minimum wage job. They're, like, asking, like, ridiculous questions, and it's like they want, like, everybody wants this champion performer, and it's like, wow, this is insane. When my mom was young, you could just go get a job and people would just hire you at the factory, like, you didn't go
Yeah.
through the same nonsense. It's
Well,
so
it's
insane.
true. It's true. And my philosophy when it comes to technologies is who is holding the keys to that technology, right? Who is at the helm running the forefront? Now, if there was technology that was being given to the people and the people were in charge of it, not the elites, then we would be more prosperous. People wouldn't go hungry. Everybody would have energy. It wouldn't be the same as it is now. And we can see that because there is the American Federal Reserve, but they're also creating something called BRICS, and BRICS is outside of the American dollar because the American dollar has been under the rule of elites for a long time. So there is a subsection of humanity that is no longer wanting to be tailor made or upholdent to that American dollar. They want to start their own thing because they well, there's a couple reasons. It's not all, sunshine and rainbows. There's devious plans with that too, which is everything. But essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to keep that AI, that technology in the elite's hands. And there's people coming
Mhm.
forward leaking it, which is why disclosure and the when the House had their committees on extraterrestrial involvement and what we've actually uncovered because of those UFOs that they've captured, that was a big step in alleviating this technology towards humanity. If we talk about the military industrial complex, the technologies that they're working on right now are about 50 years ahead of what we have out in the public domain right now. So, by this committee coming forward and saying, yes, we've retrieved alien craft, alien biologics, yada, 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 they're expressing that gap has to close a little.
They're just prepping us for stuff that's coming so we accept it?
I'm not sure. I think that what they thought was going to happen was panic, which is why they let it happen in the first place. Right? They thought that when the extraterrestrials were essentially confirmed, that humanity was going to go into a panic. And most people were like, oh, well, I knew that already anyway, whatever. And they didn't expect that. They expected complete chaos, riots in the streets, people saying, because they try to bring it in under the guise of this is a national threat, right? When
Mhm.
if they really wanted to wipe us out, we wouldn't be here right now. They're so technologically advanced that one touch of a button, they could probably eradicate our species in a moment. But they haven't done that yet. And it's not because of us, it's because of them. It has to be. Their technology is way too far ahead of ours. The fact that they're traversing through time, space, dimensions, who knows, right? So they wanted to instill more fear upon everybody. But what they didn't realize is also if would they give us a common enemy, humanity's going to come together. But I don't think it was just that. I think that there was a lot of sub layers to this too. But I think it was the whistleblowers who were coming out and really pushing for this because they want to close that gap between society and the military industrial complex. Because the military industrial complex is the real threat to just about everybody across the world, whether it's our military industrial complex or the world's military industrial complex. Big business has capitulated governments, it's capitulated the people, it's capitulated everything
Wow, and I mean, you can't get more fascist than that.
for sure.
And
Money
everyone's
makes
going
the
on
world go
about
round.
Hitler. I'm like, "Hello?"
It's true because the almighty dollar is what makes the world go round, and that's part of the problem too, is they've made people so invested into money and paper and coin and currency that we also don't focus on the things that make us happy anymore. It's all about putting this system in place to keep
All about
man
the
making
Benjamin.
just a little bit less than they need to sustain a life, which is what we saw from the end of the pandemic till now. Everything was starting to catch up because everything was shut down for so long. So the dollar was holding better. So what they do, they spent trillions upon trillions of dollars to devalue the American currency to make mankind behind the eight ball again because they had us there for so long.
Well, it's I was listening to some lecture. I think Tucker Carlson interviewed that Russian guy whose daughter was probably murdered by the Ukrainians, but and stuff, other stuff about all the meds and all the medication we're on, and we've been trained that our goal is just happiness, and so if our goal is happiness, we want to be safe and secure and happy. Everybody thinks they should be happy all the time. And so when they go through anything remotely, struggle or depression, they're like, there must be a pill to make me. We've been trained that there's a pill to make you happy. And I'm like, look, sometimes life is shitty and it sucks and you have to come up with solutions to get through it. It doesn't mean you need a pill. And I watched my family members become people who were just like, oh, I have a problem, I'll go get a pill. I'm like, how about you start eating junk food? I've got a problem, I'm depressed. I'm like, yeah, well, your life sucks, so I'd be depressed too. It's, but nobody wants feelings. They just want to shut it down, and we've been trained to not feel feelings and that everything has to be happy, happy, happy
Well, that's part
every
of the
time.
Rockefeller Foundation's medicine and the Rockefeller medicine system that they've put into place, which goes back to these elites controlling everything since, really coming out around the world in World War II, where the naturopathic ways of fixing things that were ailments that the ancestors used for millennia, right? Now everything is a pill, everything's big pharma, and they have complete control, so much so that they've outlawed a lot of these naturopathic practices across the country because they want you to be a lifelong customer, and that's what they do,
Mm.
which is why they poisoned us during the pandemic, which is the crazy part, right? They unleash these things where they're not even supposed to be working on these types of things, right? Not to go to too much detail because I know we're still on YouTube a little bit, but
Hmm.
this started with the entirety of the pandemic in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, in 2015. So when the moratorium was put in place, boom, now it goes to China. From China, it comes back here. That's the timeline, and that's what we were
Mhm.
screaming from the rooftops forever. And everybody said, "You're crazy." I mean, I went on a podcast and I was told I had people trying to debate me. And I said, "Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it." And when they were debating me, they essentially said that what they were getting was from the Bible, but what I was reading from the white papers of our government wasn't true. So it's like
Yeah.
you're pretty much using the same method that I am to figure out what you're looking at. So who's right here, right? But again, your local conspiracy theorist was probably telling you, don't do this, don't do that. This is what it is, and this is how it's happening. And all of
Well,
that is true now.
it was uh, it was obvious because they just rolled out everything too fast. It was like lockdown. Oh my god! And I'm just like, and they kept repeating the numbers on the TV over and over, the death count, da, da, and I'm like, okay, I'm like, everybody, this is bullshit. This is total propaganda. I'm like, no, I'm like, there's only one reason you do stuff like this. They did it on 9/11 too, is to terrify people and make them do what you already have planned. I'm like, there's no reason to keep announcing death numbers. Like, that's crazy.
They had a
Hmm.
counter in the corner of the television at all
Yeah,
times if you watch the
yeah,
news. And what they wanted to do was to change the public perception to being like, okay, we're going to get out of this, to looking towards their government and saying, help us. What can you do to help us? That's what they tried to change. Because
yeah,
before that, there were certain people saying, "Oh, we need the government to help us." Blah, blah, blah. We basically signed control over to them to put the system on its head. They're supposed to be working for us, and now it's almost like we work for them. And that's what they wanted. So they were successful in that move. What they didn't see coming was the fallout and how fast the information came from people that were out there talking about it and researching it and how fast it turned their narrative on its head. So now they have
yeah.
to backpedal. They had to come out and say, well, we messed up a few things during that time period, which when was the
Whoopsie.
last time you ever heard any government agency say something like that? Never. Never.
Never. They would just burn the information and say it never happened. They
Exactly.
could they rolled it out too quick and too fast. It was too crazy. They couldn't deny that it happened. Now, I know we were talking about like changes in the Gregorian calendar and stuff, but I was also mentioning that, hey, I wonder if there were conspiracy theorists in like ancient Rome or in history, and you said yeah, you could talk to that too. And I thought, because this can't be a new thing where people are questioning their government and or their rulers and official narratives. Do you know anything about, say a conspiracy theorist, somebody who was challenging the government thousands of years ago?
Well, we could talk about ancient Egypt and ancient Sumer and how there was this under the ancient Sumeria is probably one of the first civilizations of this incarnation of man, where the gods were among the people, and Enki and Lil, and we could talk about all, Ea, who was the father of all of it. And essentially, they turned the tide and beat back those gods to get them off of, really off of the planet in that sense. But what happens is they the gods at the time, from what they say in ancient writings, covered up Atlantis. Now, what they did was they used some of the Atlantean technology to bring themselves to power. We can look at the ancient Egyptians' list of kings and the ancient Sumerian list of kings, and we see that these kings are living for 10,000 years, 1,000 years, 2,000 years. So what happens is there is a we can basically, when we start to get to like Greece and ancient Greece,
Mhm.
Plato is trying to talk about the what Atlantis was. So he goes to Egypt and he talks to Solon, and Solon is an ancient Egyptian priest. And this ancient Egyptian priest tells him all about a time before before ancient Egypt and how ancient Egypt came to be, and he was talking about tales of Atlantis. So Atlantis in the beginning times was the conspiracy theory, and they were spreading it through Plato and his works to tell people that there used to be a civilization where the dragons would fly, where towers were as tall as the sky, which can lead us back to the Bible, and we're talking about the Tower of Babel and the bad side of what we know as the opposition in the ancient, the Old Testament. So we're looking at that, and they brought this information into the mainstream. And at the time, Plato was revered as this amazing writer and this historian. And when he talked about Atlantis a little bit, you know, they kind of frowned upon it a little bit. But then Solon came and was talking to the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians were actually an extension of what was left over of the Atlanteans. So the Atlanteans were the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, and the ancient Irish. And you're asking yourself, how would the ancient Irish get into this mix? Well, the Phoenicians used to sail to Ireland, and the Druids of Ireland are actually ancients from Atlantis or Lemuria, one of the two. It's very convoluted, but these people were very spiritual in their way of diving into what we are, who we are, and what our relationship is to these ancient cultures. So a lot of these places were taken out, and we don't talk about them anymore. I mean, we talk about Egypt, but we rarely talk about Solon. We do talk about Plato because of his great works and what he would talk about later of democracy and things like that. But the Irish, the Druidic Irish, had these ceremonies and these rituals that were very very energetic in the way that they did it, which kind of is related to Stonehenge a little bit, even though that's in England. But there
Mhm.
is a lot of burying of those types of civilizations, and that's the conspiracy too, is they don't want us to know about these things because it's going to hamper their control even in the contemporary ages if we know more about these different cultures, which is really wild. So a lot of this stuff goes down word of mouth too. So those are some of the conspiracies that we talk about from the beginning of time. But this Atlantean technology, just to go back to ancient Sumeria, also helped the ancient Sumerian regular human beings dispel the gods. And they didn't come back again until Egypt was erected. And they had all these cities and they pushed them back. So two of these entities were supposed to stick around, which was Enki and Enlil. And what most people don't realize, and I'm going to get a lot of heat for this because there's a lot of people within the spiritual community that pledge allegiance to one or the other, not realizing that when we look at extraterrestrials and their agendas, we have to look at it in shades of gray, right? They have an agenda. Their agenda is to succeed at whatever it is they're trying to do. So there is no good guy, there is no bad guy. They are both in that shade of gray because we don't know what the ultimate goal is. So we can't judge somebody without understanding what that ultimate goal is. So while, a lot of these, and this is going to be full circle now, but while a lot of people are pledging their allegiance to these entities, even in today's time, they don't realize that these are the entities that are possibly pulling the strings of these
Hmm.
elites to get them to this point and to essentially get us to where we need to be under their thumb once again, which is really, that's the full circle conspiracy, which is the long game, I guess. They live for 10,000 years. They have all the time in the world to get humanity under their thumb. That's for sure.
Well, and it would be if you have these bloodlines that are continuing on, and we're seeing, we it would be hard for just a normal individual who may not even know who their great great grandparent was. It would be really hard for them to see this whole overarching narrative and game of change. And it's just interesting how we have certain big changes happening right now when there's these big shifts, and a lot of people don't realize that the elites are very aware of numerology. They're very aware of ritualistic practices. They don't want you to do that. They don't want you to realize that 9/11 and those two buildings were very symbolic. They don't want you to see that stuff, but they do things on, on eclipses. They do things numerologically. They will create disasters on certain special days for a reason. And it's probably linked to whoever these gods are, demons, whatever the hell you want to call them, that they worship. They got
Well,
a deal.
they've posed as a lot of things, and we can take Hollywood as the sort of like the example, right? But I call it Holly weird because they're all really strange, and
Mhm.
they do things like the humiliation ritual. The humiliation ritual is where they come out and some people call it a funny moment. Some people call it this moment where they're humiliating themselves to be a part of the greater collective, which then they start to get into sacrificial, certain people are sacrificed, things like that. And it's a map to show you how they indoctrinate these people. And then when some of these people get into the upper echelons of that Holly weird hierarchy, they want out because it's just too real for them. It's too crazy. Or this person looks like they're having a psychiatric break when really
Yeah.
they're just seeing a lot of these crazy things, and
Yeah.
their subconscious is like, I can't take any more of this. I mean, look at
Kind
Britney
of.
Spears, shaved her head, gave her money
Yeah.
to her father. I mean, all these things, humiliates herself on the regular because she's trying to get back into that class when she was ousted and
Yeah.
ostracized. Look at Lady Gaga, does the same stuff. It's crazy. They have spirit cooking rituals with Marina Brumjanovich, and they're literally
Yeah.
cutting cakes that look like human beings as a mock sacrifice. We could talk about Epstein's Island and what they were doing there, and how a lot of these actors and actresses look like they have Ozempic face now because they haven't had their special fluids in a while, to say the least, right? And we see it. They're like, oh, I'm on Ozempic. I'm just getting skinnier, but they were skinny to begin with. So their faces are contorting because they're not
Yeah.
enacting that evil the way that they used to, and it's taking a toll on them.
Madonna looking like
Oh God,
Saw guy or whatever his name is. Like, well,
that's
they
wild.
are, and you know what? I'm not even against plastic surgery if someone wants to, they're getting older and they want to freshen up their look by 7 years or get. I'm like, hey, whatever, I get it, but this is not. these people are reconstructing what they look like. They're 65 trying to be 25, like Hoochie Coochie Mama. You've got 20-year-olds reconstructing their entire face to look like nothing like who they look like. It's like they're saying, God, you're awful and you did it wrong and we're going to do it right, but they end up looking kind of freaky.
Look at Beyonce recently, right? So Beyonce has an alter ego called Sasha Fierce, right? And somebody was
Mhm.
talking about this on TikTok, and I agree with exactly what they were saying. I forget who it was, but there was a moment where Beyonce was sweet Beyonce. She was just this girl trying to make it. And then this entity comes along named Sasha Fierce. And so, while people think, oh, it's just her alter ego, no, that's a demon inside of her. And when she performed at the Super Bowl, that was the last vestige before that of Beyonce
Mhm.
actually being in there. When she did the things that she did during the Super Bowl, which is ritualistic by anybody's, you know, condemnation of it, she gave way for Sasha Fierce to encapsulate that vessel at all times. And now Beyonce is no longer there. It's Sasha Fierce. This is what
Yeah.
they do. There is an energetic something
Well,
going on behind the scenes that people don't normally see.
we did we did a show on Belizean Grove. It's like the female version of Bohemian Grove, and she's part of it.
Yeah.
And it's there's her music videos of late in the past 5 to 10 years are really strange. And the Belizean Grove, they're down they have a place where they meet in New York, but a lot of their meetings happen down in South America where they can get away with stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of it's
Yeah.
in the jungle somewhere because not
Yeah.
only that, but Bohemian Grove was found out. People have accessed it. People have gotten in it, gotten into the
Yeah.
ceremony, so they can't revere Moloch in the same way that they do if they go somewhere else that's off the map. So they changed venues, but they're still doing the
Yeah.
same things. I mean,
Yeah.
you
It's
can see
just
so
women
many.
doing this group called Belizean Grove. It's just all females. And they're like, "It's a business group."
Yeah,
Oh,
sure.
their goal is at any cost to get a female to be president. So I bet you they were very upset in 2016.
Oh, with Hillary. I mean, it's crazy. There is
I think she's part of it.
oh, for sure. Do you
Mhm.
see what she looks like now compared to what she looked like then? That there was moments when she was on the campaign trail where she was having these like seizure-like moments where she was going
Yep.
into, like, either a convulsion or she was just disconnected, and that's because that's the soul fighting the demon or the entity for control, and the brain is misfiring because these people have given themselves to something so dark that it's very hard to even describe who or what they are anymore, and these things
Right.
exist. I mean, people who are in the paranormal field hunt these things out. So we know that they exist from their encounters with certain entities on the other side that talk to them through spirit boxes. There's rituals where they conjure these things to talk to them. I mean, it's this stuff is pretty in our face now. When if this was, colonial times, you'd be labeled a witch and burned at the stake. But they still were people doing those activities even back then. This is like a
Of course.
subsection of humanity that has been here since the beginning of time.
It is so crazy now. I know you talk a lot about spirituality and awakening, and like you just said, the Catholic Church, they don't control your spirituality. You were born into that, but your connection with God is divine. They don't get to, you know, control that. And someone was saying, religion is just spirituality politicized and all of that stuff. And but you talk about spirituality a lot. And now, did you get into that mode of it as a response to how you can behave in this world of all these conspiracy theories and all this wicked narratives and how you can defeat it? Or
Kind of. I mean, and that's a great way to sum some of it up. But what happens is when we start to get into like the UFO aspect of ufology, you start to see that there is a somewhat of a spiritual component to the encounters that some people have. Not every extraterrestrial comes from off world. Some come from alternate dimensions. There's portals which they use to travel. There's stargates, and stargates open for entities to come through. So diving into some of this research, like Project Looking Glass and some of the different CIA declassified things that we've talked about on my podcast, we see that there is a component which goes to the spirit, and the spirit is part of who everybody is. Everybody, as far as we understand it, has a soul. Well, some people are NPCs, they don't. They've given their, but at one time had a soul, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people believe that this vessel is created and the soul is injected into it. My philosophy is this vessel was created by our soul or by our consciousness to live within this 3D reality, to interact and either teach, learn, or just interact in that sense of it. But I think a lot of it had to do with me trying to understand, what am I, right? Who am I? How does this whole universe work? And some of it has to do with like outer space and extraterrestrials, and how are they able to communicate telepathically yet we're not. There's a lot of different things that brought me to this crescendo of my spirituality, and a lot of it had to do with research and understanding. And some of it, and I'm going to be quite honest about it, when you hear it, it just rings true in your soul. You feel it.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a visceral reaction when you hear something and you're like, that makes sense. Now I understand why it is, and why am I like this, right? So there's a lot that goes to that, but it was more of of an exploration of a lot of different works and really pondering those questions that, like, what's the meaning of life? Why are we here? Right? I've gone through past life regressions. So if I go through past life regressions and they say that I've had a multitude of lifetimes up to now, how does that work? Why are we getting to that point? How is it that I keep coming in and out of this consciousness and reality the way that I am? And if we go into deep meditations, how am I able to see certain things or interact with certain things like the Akashic record, or, ancestors, or how am I able to heal people with my hands and not just, it doesn't make sense. So we have to figure out those aspects of who we are, and all of those things I'm capable of, and I just didn't have an idea of why. But it's because as I was learning the information, how you see a lot of spiritual people like, oh, come into my live and I'll activate you, and then your DNA will surge, and you'll be able to do these things, and it's an activation. Well, the information is the activation. The information resonates with you on a cellular level. Therefore, your DNA is not only giving you parts of your history, but
Mm-hmm.
it's opening itself to your spiritual field, and your spiritual field is now letting you actualize some of these things and ignite these things inside of yourself. So when you go to somebody who's a healer and they say, "I'm going to heal you," that's never the case. They are giving you energy so that you heal yourself. All of it is
Right.
relative within you. So when you look for those things, or when you try and examine those things, it's all going to come from inside of you anyway. External information only activates the mind, which in turn activates the soul, which in turn makes your genetics fire up. And then your genetics give you the blueprint of who, what, and how you are. And that's kind of where
Right.
I got into it.
It's kind of like activating ancient archetypes of your genetics.
Exactly. Exactly. And the history can be coupled in with that spiritual side of it. And now you've got a full totality of what and who you are. And your potential is unlimited. Everybody here who's listening right now has unlimited potential. And that's part of what we talk about. We can be whatever we want, we can be whoever we want. Just like one day you wake up and you want to be down and out, or you want to be angry at everybody, so you do it. That's the
Yeah.
same way, but we could do it on the opposite end of the spectrum and say, I'm going to live every moment in that positive mindset. I'm going to live every moment trying to help those around me and help others, and be that example that I can for others, because we can really have an effect on how we how we relate to each other as a society and as humanity itself. And that sort of was the moment where it was like, I have to stop listening to everybody else and build my own archetype of who I think I am and live within
Mhm.
that archetype and act that out and play that out for everybody.
Your own subculture.
Yeah, yeah, and
It's
that's kind of
been
what we've made on YouTube, and it's been,
yeah.
I don't wanna say successful, but I feel there's a cathartic piece to it because I get to speak this information to others, which hopefully they turn it and give it to the next man and the next man, and we have or woman, and we have a domino effect, and that's incredible.
Well, it used to always be that people make the culture, and now we live, elites are always trying to steal from us and make the culture now. Like, they try to make the culture, but it's the people that make the culture
Exactly.
and the rise and stuff, but they always try. That's why I'm like, "Oh, they're gonna follow." They're not. I don't call them the elites. They're not the elites. They're the parasites. They're parasite off of the mass of humans because that's where they're getting all their energy and they're controlling our thoughts. But they also want to take from us, and it doesn't matter if we ghost hunt next. They're gonna have a ghost hunting show that's funded by some billionaire because they have to take hold of the narrative and they have to have all this stuff. And it doesn't matter what you do. They just sort of parasite because I don't think they have original thoughts and ideas. One question I did want to ask you about the whole spiritual stuff is, do you think that the creator or God has put these elites and all these kind of um s- we're calling them conspiracy theories, but the elites and all the things they do you think that it's a test? Do you think we're supposed to experience this to challenge us to see if we can remember actually how to live and what's life about? Like, it's
I
like
I
a
think I think that there is a potential for that, but I also think
mhm,
that because the universe works on that balance,
mhm,
while there is the creator, there is the destroyer as well.
mhm,
And even in the beginning of the inception of this universe, which we talk about in this series I did called Galactic Beginnings, and it talks about extraterrestrial life and where it comes from. And in the beginning stage of this universe, there was what we called unity consciousness, which means it was just a singular entity, and it works out its most inner fantasies however it sees fit, right? It plays out everything that it ever wanted to, and it builds up this energy. And at that moment, our universe became dualistic in nature because when it breaks apart, there's electricity and magnetism, which are not the same, but they're actually connected to each other, which becomes a symbol for the masculine and the feminine.
mhm.
Just like that's where the yin and the yang starts. So this unity consciousness was there at God's will. So are there alternate universes where it was the adversary who was creating that unity consciousness? I believe so. Just like
Interesting.
just like there is a opposition to everything. That's just that I think that that's needed for balance.
So
So
the
while
universe really is Boolean. It's
yeah,
zeros and ones.
yeah.
Wow, it's yin and yang, zeros and ones.
That's the intelligent design of it, right? We could take a look at some of the spiraling galaxies out there, and then we look at the Fibonacci sequence, and it's relatively the same in context of what we're looking at, right? And that's the synchronicities of it. So while I believe that there is God, there is also an adversary too, and that adversary is not Lucifer. Lucifer is created after God is up against the adversary to create these two universes back
Oh,
to back. And the reason why they use things like CERN, the way they do rituals is to open the gate between those universes to bring those negatives into this positive light and try and disrupt it at every section, every moment, and every second of time. So that's the fight we're in right now. And it is a spiritual war
and
because they're opening portals all over the place.
how do we, shut the portals, or how do we to tie up the show, how do we face this world? And obviously these conspiracies have been going on for a very long time, all throughout ancient history. What can people do? I mean, besides get upset and egg on more wars.
Well, stand on your soapbox and call every ounce of it out, no matter what people are saying to you, no matter the ridicule, no matter what happens. Because we're in this information age, the moment we get things out there, it changes the perception of those who it reaches. And in time, we'll be able to flush out all of those entities, all of those elites, and we will make society better. But again, they're not going to go away completely. There is a
Mhm.
balance to it, right? So, what we're working for right now is 1,000 years of peace. That's the first thing we should work for. And in those 1,000 years, we can actually harness different types of energies and, meet our ancestors from the stars and have all these achievements. So, when you see something, you say something. Everybody should have their own podcast. Everybody should have their own way to get the information out. The information sharing is the most important aspect of it. And it's because that information could be the threshold that somebody else needs to
Mhm.
start to see that awakening moment. And the more thresholds we hit, the greater domino effect we're going to have, the more enlightened people we have on the planet, the further we go out and the more our civilization survives.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it certainly is about balance. Now, I want to thank you for coming on the show. That was really fascinating. I got one more question. I was looking
Yeah.
at World War II and we were talking about narratives and how it got triggered off. Do you think this is totally off topic? Do you think Hitler survived World War II and went down to Argentina, or do you think the Russians really got his body and it played
No,
out how
he
they were?
survived. He
You think
survived.
so?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you why. Because if we go back to World War One, there was something in Europe called the League of Nations that
Mm-hmm.
was set up after World War One. But the one difference was America wasn't a part of it. And
Mm-hmm.
America was the base for the elites at the time, right? They were the ones funding most of
Really?
everything. A lot of them, yeah. A lot of the elites lived here.
Right, because a lot of the bankers helped form, the reserve, right? And
Right.
get
So
off the gold standard.
they also helped form the League of Nations. But the
Right,
American government wasn't corrupted to that point yet. They were still for the people.
right.
But by the time we get to World War II, they create this conflict that most of Europe is destroyed, and America has to come to the aid of Europe.
Oh my
Otherwise, Europe is going to die a slow and painful death. Even though Hitler was pushed back in Russia, it doesn't mean that he was done, right?
god. Right.
His style of war was successful in destroying civilization. So the
And
elites,
that's what they wanted.
yes. So America was involved, and they knew if they got America involved, there was a chance that they could bring them in to the United Nations, which is the next
Right.
aspect of it, which is what their that was their turn towards global governance. That was that
Yes.
moment where they went into global governance. So the elites still needed boogeymen, so they took Hitler and skirted him into South America so that he could hopefully build the Fourth Reich and start again. And every time that they would have one of these events, they would take more and more of people's freedoms away because America was the shining beacon on the hill. And they knew that
Mhm.
they could never conquer America at its shores. It had to come from within.
Yes.
So if we look back at World War II, at Madison Square Garden, there was a meeting of Nazis because there was a Nazi contingent within America. It's the wildest thing you'll see. They're at Madison Square Garden praising Hitler. And you're like, wait a minute, what? Like there was
Yeah. Well,
Nazis
I mean,
everywhere.
he was on the cover of Time
Twice,
magazine
twice,
twice.
twice as the man of the year
Wow.
twice. So this is what they were trying to do. They were creating another avenue for that boogeyman to resurge back to the forefront. Now, Hitler never took that bait again because he knew how bad it was the first time and how wanted he was after the first time. And he figured I
Mhm.
made it out by, I only made it out by, you know, a short hair on the last one. They'll definitely kill me this time. So he started creating little pockets of Nazis down in South America. And then they
Which
actually,
what was it? You had in Argentina, there was a
yep,
riot, like Nazism flourished there.
yeah, they had a small town on top of a mountain, and they were trying to make it to Antarctica because he was still looking for what they called the Wunderwaffen, which is the wonder weapon that would have basically turned the tide of no matter what they were going to do. And that's what his goal was at that point, was to find this holy grail of items that was from Atlantis that was going to push his agenda, and he could get revenge on the bankers who were funding him the first time and then stopped their funding because the United States government was coming down on them. So,
Do you think it even well, obviously, we still have those bankers around.
of course, those families are still holding on strong to a lot of those banking institutions. Now, it's changing now because there's cryptocurrency and there's other things out there, but those are also beholden to the dollar, and a dollar is the
Yeah,
Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is the end all be all,
yeah.
pretty much.
Wow, that's really well, I always thought it was a possibility he escaped, and all this stuff with Russia was bogus because they were looking for him.
Well,
They weren't convinced because he had a lot of copies and doppelgangers. They're saying, "Oh, his dental records match," but then when they did some DNA work on it, it didn't match. It said it was a woman, and they don't know, and I thought, well, it's quite possible that, they got out. I mean, why wouldn't they be planning it? I don't know. Possibly, but a lot of people don't they just think, "Well, Hitler's bad," but a lot of people don't realize, like, America was funding them, other bankers like that that were funding them that are out of London and in New York, he was not like they try to be like, "Oh, he just took all the money from the local Jews." I'm like, "There's no way. There's no way." I mean, IBM was making stuff for them.
oh,
There's
yeah.
just no way.
There's a picture of Hitler in Argentina as an old man that some people have, and it's not seen too much of the light of day, but I've heard whispers of there being a picture of him next to it's basically in front of, like, this barn-looking thing with a swastika on it, and he's
Wow.
standing there, and it looks just like him. So I haven't seen it myself, but I've heard about it, and I think the CIA has it, to be honest, but I'm sure they do. They covered up everything after he actually died, they covered it all up
Right,
because
which is
they were the
then we
ones
get
that
this
took
narrative.
right, they took all the scientists with them in Operation Paperclip, so after Hitler goes to, uh, Argentina, the CIA was there as well, and he became an asset, just like some of the other people that were involved with terrorist attack on America, right?
Well, yeah, and I know a lot of people like, I know the Holocaust happened, but people question the narrative because I know I had German relatives and they were put in concentration camps, or some of them were massacred. Whole city was massacred of German people after war. So it's not just goodies and baddies. Like there's like crazy stuff happening all over. That's why I tell people like there's crazy stuff everywhere, and normal citizens get slaughtered like millions.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
so insane, and it's because these people just wanna play psycho with the like they're playing a game of, Risk or something, like, they're just like, "Let's just move all this stuff on like, you're just little ants, we don't care."
well, look what's happening with the open border now, right? People
Yeah,
are dying in the United States, whether it's fentanyl overdoses or they're being killed by some of these migrants that are or illegals that are coming across.
yeah,
And these people are back on the street the same day. It's insane. They're, like, not charging them the way that they would charge either me or you for living in the United States, and it's a two-tiered system, and they've created that
yeah.
on purpose.
Votes and cannon fodder.
Yeah,
That's what I think they want them for.
absolutely. I mean,
Alright.
it's a wild time we live in, and I think we all chose to be here in this moment because it's our duty to change the trajectory of where humanity is going right now. You know, I think that God sent down his most vibrant souls to shine the lights on all these dark places so that we can get to this next stage of a human renaissance. And I think we're on the
Yeah.
verge of it now. And I think we're calling all this crap out for what it is. And I think we're going to change the world by doing it. And that's my hope.
All right. Well, that is fantastic. I am so glad you came on the show. Where can people find you? I've got your YouTube up there, but what platforms are you on and where should people look for you?
Yeah, first let me say thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be here always, and thank you for letting me speak my mind. And I loved it. It was a great conversation. We should do it again soon. And you can find me on Rumble. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere. Just look up Full Spectrum Universe, and you'll probably find me there because it's either Rob Yox or Full Spectrum Universe. And I mean, we're everywhere. I try to be on every
Excellent.
platform. I now post on every platform, but if we're having a show coming up, you can always get a notification. We also have a Substack as well, which gives out notifications to all the shows that are coming up. And yeah, come join us and be a part of this grand family we have. It's crazy how many people we have coming through and all the fun we have going over a lot of this ancient history, but also how it affects us in the contemporary too. So thank you so much for having me.
No problem. I'm going to tuck you in the green room and I'll be right there. I'm going to tie up the show. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. I hope you got a lot. We were all over the place there, but I hope you got a lot from that conversation. I liked when I have that, I like to throw because I took World War One and World War Two history in university for the first year or two that I was there. And I always like to throw out these narratives because even, gosh, what was it, 20 years ago in university, I knew that there was something wrong with the narratives and I would question even their insinuation that communism and fascism were just utterly totally different and communism was better and the narratives I just it's probably why I dropped history because I didn't like the official narrative. So I always like to have that conversation and pull World War II and Hitler into it. Like, what do you think really happened? Do you think they're telling us the truth? Because chances are that they are not. So there you have it. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Please, of course, again, subscribe to my content, share the content, especially on X. Give it a like, give it a retweet, give it a heart. If you're listening to this podcast audio, like on iTunes or Stitchers or something, 5 stars. That helps us show up in the charts and rating. I can't remember what categories we're in there. We're on. I put this stuff up on Podbean, so you can find us over at Podbean as well. So that was great. That went by actually really fast. Fantastic. All right, guys, I am going to sign off. I'm going to go make myself some supper, and I hope you guys have a wonderful night. I'm going to be back tomorrow for the new show. There's no show Thursday for the Beast System with Emily. She's really busy this week, but on Friday, I'm appearing on Emily's show. We are what the frick. I'll share links all over my social media. We're talking about our favorite infamous serial killer. We're talking about conspiracy theories around Ted Bundy, and then we're going to do some more Ted Bundy on Tinfoil Hat Friday. That's, I think, we're doing that at 9 p.m. Eastern. Anyways, I'll post links on all the social medias. Be sure to follow, and cheers, guys.